win the defensive up and down too. But I've got a soft spot for Asdrubal, man. I don't know, man. But anyways, I think his time was already limited, and I do believe that. I think that at this point, I think Lindor's ascent is limited by himself. I think the more he shows, the quicker at AAA, the more likely and the sooner that we see him called up. I think he's kind of controlling his own destiny right now.
You know, it's interesting, though. Ironically, I think that this injury might cause Cabrera to stick around longer, because if there were any ideas of trading Cabrera, if there were teams interested in Cabrera, that might be off the table, because he might not be able to play for the next couple of weeks, and you don't want to trade for somebody who's damaged goods, at least temporarily damaged goods. Who knows how bad it could be? It could be very, very bad. So you don't want to go ahead and trade for him. So I think Cabrera is going to be sticking around with the Indians at least for the rest of this season, just based on him getting. I like Asdrubal Cabrera too. I think that the bloom is off the rose a little bit. I think that we kind of see him for who he is. He's not like one of the totally elite top 5 shortstops in the game, and he's probably not going to develop into that. I think he's really kind of found his level, but he is good. He is solid. I think he's better than average, and he does come up with a very clutch hits, and he wins some games for you at the plate. So I'm not one of the people either who's like, well, let's just get rid of Asdrubal. I kind of like having him around. Of course, eventually you're not going to really keep him and Lindor around. So it does seem like his time is eventually limited. It's going to be a matter of, can the Indians get something for him when it's time for Cabrera to go? But I kind of, now with this injury, I don't think it's time for Cabrera to go right now.
No, and I'm going to play devil's advocate for Asdrubal, because if he is injured to where it takes you through the break or through the deadline, and you're not able to make a deal, and he stays, to me, that could play into the Indians' favor coming down the stretch, because he's in a contract year, he's in a walk year. Whether he wanted to stay in Cleveland, whether he wanted to be a free agent, whatever it is, he knows that he's got to pick up his. Right now, it's not terrible. He's got himself up near 250. He's got 9 home runs, 39 RBIs, both disappointments from what I predicted him. I said, hey, if the Indians are going to contend, he's going to have to be one of the offensive MVPs. So definitely, I'm disappointed in that, and every time he starts to warm up a little bit, like we saw a little bit there in June, you hit the month of July where he's hitting, 254, back down a little bit. So, but my thing is you come down that last 6 weeks of the season or whatever, if he's got to play to show people what he can do next year and to audition for teams, the Indians can benefit from that mentality as well. But then again, the flip side is, what's to say he hasn't? It's not like he hasn't been trying all season. You know what I mean? But maybe that works out for the Indians as well. I think that, they're covering their bases, no pun intended, by having Lindor ready too. But, you're right. I think that does hurt. And for people that say, what are you going to get a big balls for Asdrubal? I say, hey, man, I think you undervalue. Look at what some of these teams are willing to pay for. I look at some of the levels. By the way, let me segue this into something. Yesterday I was talking to somebody off the air about some of these names being thrown out by the Indians while we're talking about Sparks and adding things at the deadline. 2 of the names that I heard made no sense to me. One made a tiny bit of sense, but even that, when I thought about what was being asked for, was too much. And that was, I don't know if you've heard this, but I've heard Soriano. I've heard his name thrown out there as somebody the Indians had at least approached discussions on, and I'm like, why? What in the world? Listen, we've got 221 hitters that can strike out 71 times in 67 games. I'm just being real. His name's Nick Swisher. We already cheer for one of them, and I'm not even being. I like Nick Swisher. I'm just being a clown. But seriously, Soriano's got nothing. He's a year removed from 34 home runs last year, I believe. But so yeah, he had some pop up till last year, but whatever it was, he doesn't have it. Whatever he was taking, whatever was in the water, it's not in the water that he's drinking this year, because he had like 6 home runs and 71 strikeouts in 67 games, and he was hitting 221. So that one baffled me. The other name was A.J. Burnett, and I get it. The guy's got a playoff pedigree. He's got a ton of experience. He has been playing baseball since 1999 at the major league level, but I look at the last couple of years that he was in the American League, his ERA was a full 1.5 higher than what it is right now, And he hasn't been exactly knocking the doors down. Plus, on top of that, he's got a big chunk of money still left on his contract. Same with Soriano. I mean, I think they both have $8.5 million left to be paid this season, not for the whole season. That's what's left on their contracts, because they had like a $14 and a $16 million respectively contract. So even if the teams were willing to, but then I started hearing about, names, like I heard Santana's name was in one of the discussions. I'm like, are you serious? No way the Indians can possibly be considering it. But these are the level of not only rumors, but crazy things that these teams ask for these guys. And I'm like, man, nobody should give the Phillies anything for Burnett. He's a one-year rental that they got. They picked him up for $16 million off the trash heap, which is a pretty expensive thing to take off the trash heap in the offseason.
Yeah.
But, who would give, who in their right mind would give any legitimate prospects to a team for a guy that they, are holding on to for 2 months? I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't do it. And plus, I don't know what he brings, but at least he's a pitcher. Soriano has no interest to me at all, man.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Soriano either. I like how Burnett has done a little bit better, but like you said, I think a lot of that has to do with pitching in the National League.
Yeah.
I think the only teams that can really make trades like that are teams that just have so much money that it really is a drop in the bucket. Teams like the Red Sox or the Dodgers, it's like, yeah, let's get him, and if he works out, fine. If not, it's okay. We have tons of money. It doesn't matter. A team like the Indians can't make that kind of move. They have to maximize every dollar that they get. And what's going to work out for this team, if this team is going to make it across the finish line, it's the guys that are currently on the team, the guys that are making decent money, and guys like Cabrera and Masterson who are playing for next year's money. They've got to come through. The people like Swisher and Santana have to hit. People like Cabrera and Bourne and Masterson, they have to get healthy again, and they have to come back and do it. Again, there's not going to be, I don't think anyone's really going to ride to the rescue unless some really crazy thing happens with David Price. But as much as I would love to see that happening, I just kind of see somebody else, with deeper pockets getting a hold of him. But I hope I'm wrong. I mean, somebody like him is the one person I think who we could trade for who could really make it different. But other than that, I think we're going to have to sink or swim with mostly this cast of characters, and they just have to do it.
Absolutely. And the trade deadline stuff is always so ridiculous, talking about the prices.
Yeah.
We just brought up Willingham, right? He beat the Indians last night, but on the season, he's hitting .209 with 8 home runs. And there's a huge, not I want to say huge, but a swelling trade market right now for Willingham. I joked about the Indians being in on him a couple years ago, and I think that was the year they brought in Tomey instead, when everybody was like, grab Willingham. And always the Indians to be in on something a little too late. But look at that here. There's a swelling trade market growing for a guy who's hitting .209. I mean, the frenzy that comes up at this time of year just drives me nuts, man. And you'll watch some teams be shrewd about it, but then you look at the haul that some teams get for guys that you just go, wow, really? And that's why, as much as it's frustrating from a fan's perspective to watch the trade deadline come and go and not see your team do anything, and sometimes that can be disheartening to the team on the field. There was a couple of years ago that I truly felt the trade deadline broke the Indians. It was Manny Acta's last year when they were floating around 500. They were hanging in there with not the most talented team at all. And when they did nothing at the deadline, that was it. Like, the team just collapsed. When they realized management didn't help us at all, they collapsed. Remember, we had that just terrible end of the season. So I do think you got to worry about that. But sometimes I don't blame a team either. It's not always just being cheap. When we saw the Deadspin stuff that came out and you saw the level of prospects that these teams were asking for certain guys, and it's the same thing like the people that talk about the Cavs going after Kevin Love, and some people's argument against it is that's still 4 first-round draft picks for one guy, no matter what we're talking about. Kind of the same thing here. The price becomes so prohibitive that I understand sometimes when teams like the Indians go, hey, you know what? We're going to stick with what we got because this is crazy, because you end up cutting off your nose to spite your face with some of these trades.
Right, because everybody is trying to not make the big mistake. They're just saying, I want to make a trade, but I want to, cover my back and make sure that I don't do something that I'm going to get ridiculed for the next several years. These are GMs talking. So that's why they want to err on the side of asking for too much. And then, well, we tried, but, the other team just didn't say yes. But you just really have to make sure that you don't, really get a lopsided trade that's in somebody else's favor. So, you mentioned the thing with Manny Acta. I do remember that season where the team just really seemed disheartened by the fact that they didn't get any help, and it just really affected them. I think that this team wouldn't have that same reaction because I think this team knows that it has underachieved based on compared to last year and as far as individual stats go. Because you can't say, well, why aren't we getting any help? Because the help has to come from within. People like Carlos Santana and Nick Swisher and even guys like Ryan Rayburn have to be hitting higher than 201, 208, 209. That's where the help has to come from. It's not the management's fault to not bring in somebody else because the guys on the team are not doing as well as they should be. And this team is actually a game above 500 considering all the problems and the injuries. If they can somehow put things back together, then that would be amazing. In fact, one thing that the players were talking about is how encouraged they had that they are still in the race going into the second half. They say, well, we had a lot of problems. Let's kind of forget them. We're still in this thing. Let's go. Great games against the Tigers. So hopefully they can keep that up. But so this team, I think they realize that they're the ones who are going to have to dig themselves out of this jam.
No, for sure. And I agree with you. I think that in all honesty, and I liked Manny Acta, but I was around at that time. And I got to tell you, I think that team read his feelings about things and projected them because I truly believe Manny Acta was disappointed that the Indians didn't go out and get anything that year. And so I think I do agree. You would not see that from these Indians. Number one, because it's a different group of guys. It's a more talented group of players, if we're being honest. And Terry Francona is a totally different manager. They wouldn't get that vibe from him. I truly felt that team reflected Manny Acta. He kind of soured on management at that point when they didn't help him as a manager, I think, and the team really fed off that, and it was bad. It was negative. I saw Bruce said in the chat room 23 losses that August, so no way do I think this team is the same as that. And you know what? I want to circle this conversation kind of around to where we started talking about sparks, and we mentioned one name from last year was Salazar. He's getting the opportunity to do that again. He gets the chance starting tonight. Remember, last year, he came up in the second half of the season, and really guys didn't have book on him, so he was able to, remember, impressive. Even when he got beat early by the Tigers, he went right at those guys, but we've seen the second year's kind of sophomore slump with him this year, the injury that hurt him. Last 5 starts since he got sent down to AAA, 8 runs allowed in 31 innings, a 2.3 ERA. He appears ready to come back up. So here we go with Danny Salazar round 2. What do you expect to see from him tonight?
I think he's going to do very well. I think he's really gone under a lot of people's radar. I think a lot of people forgot about him. In fact, even ESPN accidentally called him Danny Santana, who's actually a player on the Twins.
There we go.
So he's really under everybody's radar, and it's like, hey, he's back. Because we've seen him do well last year. Of course, it didn't work out for him this year, but, I think that, all these guys went down and they cycled through and they tried to work things out, and due to necessity, you have McAllister being called back up, and now you have Salazar being called back up. I'm not saying that he's going to be, the second coming of Corey Kluber, but I think he could pitch very well, and I think he could maybe stick with this team, and that's really what they need, again, until Masterson comes back, until, because as much as we talk about how the hitters need to hit, it really a lot comes down to starting pitching. If you look at how well the team played in those first 3 games against the Tigers, the starting pitching was just outstanding, which is really what we got a lot out of the second half of last year, with just one solid starting performance after another from guys like Kluber and Kashmir and McAllister and Salazar, and then Masterson and Ubaldo. So just great pitching last year down the stretch is what helped. And we're going to need it this time. And, they're trying, bringing in guys like TJ House, and hopefully Salazar can come back and pitch somewhat at the level he did last year and maybe get this back together. But ultimately, again, I think we got to get a little bit of help from outside, or Masterson's got to come back and do it, because starting pitching is going to get this team across the finish line if it happens.
And I'll tell you, looking at Salazar, you can really see with his numbers here as why the Indians are ready to bring him back up. His first few starts down at AAA were not good for him at all. He was rough, and you can see he really got better each time, as we said, in the last 5 starts, really getting himself primed in there his last 30-some innings or whatever. But it's key. We talked about last year. He came in last year and had basically a 3 flat